Well, Dr. Jim here. It is October 21st, and I'm working my way through this book called Foundations by Dr. Childress. It's an attachment-based model of parental alienation, and it's kind of interesting. I must say I'm really enjoying this book because it's shedding some interesting light on a lot of the phenomena that we often see as child custody evaluators. And for example, you'll often see a child who is very upset about the fact that the parent who is purportedly, allegedly alienated to some degree, where the child is saying, I don't want him or her at my school activities. And the question is, often it's somewhat unusual because the child is saying, on the one hand, my mom or my dad never comes to my activities, and then on the other hand, they're saying that it's too stressful for them when the when the parent comes to those activities. And so this is what Childress has to say about those, and it's kind of interesting. So I'm just going to read. It's just 2 pages at 112 through 114 of the book I just showed you on Foundations for an Attachment-Based Model of Parental Alienation. The expulsion demand. The surrender of self-authenticity to the narcissistic borderline parent is the source of an odd but often characteristic feature of attachment-based parental alienation. And Childress always puts parental alienation in quotes. He says why he does that. I can't remember exactly why, but the basic idea is that parental alienation doesn't have a diagnostic place. It's more of a term that we use to describe or label a particular whole big subset of behaviors and phenomena that we see in divorces and breakups when when there are parents involved and children, in which the child demands that the targeted parent no longer attend the child's events, such as music recitals, sporting events, or school ceremonies. The child reports that when the targeted parent attends these events, it makes the child stressed. In actuality, it's not the targeted parent that is making the child anxious and stressed. It is having to monitor the state of the narcissistic borderline parent. When the targeted parent attends the child's events, the narcissistic borderline parent becomes upset. The child's role as the, quote, regulatory object, end quote, for the narcissistic borderline parent is to keep this parent in an organized and regulated state by reflecting the state of the parent. And Childress makes a pretty compelling argument based on well-accepted clinical psychology dynamics, both from the family systems area as well as personality theory and attachment theory, that what happens when there's a divorce or a breakup, that the narcissistic borderline person who has narcissistic borderline personality organization tends to project their feelings of disorganization and to also look to the child for the narcissistic supply that they no longer get from that ex-partner, and it becomes a role reversed relationship between the parent and the child. It's very pathogenic to the child. The potential collapse. And then, so what he says is the potential collapse of the narcissistic borderline parent into dysregulation draws the focus of the regulatory other child, distracting the child from the activity of the music recital, sporting event, or school activity. The child is no longer able to relax and simply enjoy the event because the child becomes preoccupied with regulating the distraught narcissistic borderline parent. The child is stressed not by the targeted parent's presence, but by the effect of the targeted parent's presence, but by the effect the targeted parent's presence has on the narcissistic borderline parent, whose job it is for the child to keep in an organized and regulated state. The child has learned that to keep the narcissistic parent in a regulated state, the child must surrender to becoming a reflective mirror for the state of the parent. The child has learned to read the cues emitted by the parent, whether the sky is red or green or yellow, and to then reflect this state back to the parent. The narcissistic borderline parent dislikes the presence of the targeted parent at the child's events, so the child adopts the same reflective state of not wanting the targeted parent to attend events. Now, I understand that there's an objection that many of my colleagues will be raising at this point, but and I have those objections too. And basically, well, this doesn't apply in every case, does it? Of course not. No, but in the prototypical case, this is what we're talking about. It's prototypes, and as most of us know who work with people a lot, the prototypes are prototypes. Very few people actually comport with the actual prototype. But prototypes are important because they help you to understand the dynamics from a prototypical point of view. Then, to the extent that the actual case itself departs from the prototype, that's fine, but it gives you a way of making sense of otherwise insensible behavior, or behavior that is just confusing and you can't make any sense of it. This demand by the child that the targeted parent stop coming to the child's events is based in the child's authentic experience of increased anxiety and stress created by the presence of the targeted parent. True, but it is not the targeted parent per se who is creating this increased anxiety and stress. It is the reaction of the narcissistic borderline parent that the child must then regulate that is anxiety provoking and stressful for the child. So you see, this child's anxiety and stress is real, but it's actually derivative, not directly from the presence of the targeted parent at the activities, the child's activities, but it is derivative of the targeted parent's presence at the activity as it relates to the favored parent's response to the targeted parent being there and increasing the stress, because the child then has to deal with the favored parent's stress. And so that's an interesting and important, I think, distinction to be made when analyzing these cases and seeing if alienation is alienating dynamics are taking place in a particular case. But what about the child's authentic joy and happiness at having a parent attend the child's event, he says. The child cannot allow the self-experience of authentic happiness at the targeted parent attending the child's event, because obviously we all know, perhaps from personal experience, that having your mom and your dad or your significant caregivers at your events, whatever they may be, sports, music, dance, martial arts, it doesn't matter what it is, it feels good when your parents are there or your caregivers are there. It doesn't feel good when they're not there. Some of us know from personal experience that that's true. But we can all see from just basic application of reason to see that that would be true in most cases, if not all cases. The child cannot allow the self-experience of authentic happiness at the targeted parent attending the child's event. Self-authentic experience is dangerous because it might inadvertently cause a breach in the fused relationship with a narcissistic borderline parent. The child has surrendered self-authenticity to be free of the anxiety and stress of continually monitoring the state of the narcissistic borderline parent. The child can no longer simply look at the sky and say it's blue. One of the leading figures in borderline personality processes, Marsha Linehan, refers to the nullification of self-authenticity as the invalidating environment, quote unquote, which she describes as follows. One of the interesting things that I've enjoyed about reading Dr. Childress's book is that The guy, he must have studied or read a lot of the same things that I'd have through my studies, because I remember when I read about the authenticity of the child, I remember thinking, that sounds like Linehan's invalidating environment. And then again, there he is. He's going right into it. So I'm reading from Linehan's an interesting article from 1993. This article is entitled It's Linehan and Koerner, Koerner, 1993, Behavior Theory of Borderline Personality Disorder. And it's found in J. Paris, the editor of Borderline Personality Disorder, Etiology and Treatment, from the American Psychiatric Press, pages 103 through 121. But she writes, a defining characteristic of the invalidating environment is the tendency of the family to respond erratically or inappropriately to private experience, and in particular to be insensitive, i.e. non-responsive to private experience. Invalidating environments contribute to emotional dysregulation by 1, failing to teach the child to label and modulate arousal, and 2, failing to teach the child to tolerate stress, and 3, failing to teach the child to trust his or her own emotional responses as valid interpretations of events, and 4, actively teaching the child to invalidate his or her own experiences by making it necessary for the child to scan the environment for cues about how to act and feel. So they're looking to others, and in this case, the favored parent, for cues about how to feel and act, rather than their own reaction to the environment of whatever's going on. Frizzetti, Schenk, and Hoffman, 2005, and that's an article that's entitled Family Interaction and the Development of Borderline Personality Disorder, a Transactional Model, from Development and Psychopathology, 1007 through 1030, and that's from 2005. That sounds like a good one to read. Describe the loss of self-authenticity and psychological fusion that occurs as a result of the invalidating environment. In extremely invalidating environments, parents or caregivers do not teach children to discriminate effectively between what they feel and what the caregivers feel, what the child wants and what the caregiver wants, or wants the child to want, what the child thinks and what the caregiver thinks. You see, children need to know that what they feel is valid, and what the parent feels may be different, but that doesn't invalidate the child's feelings. When you're living with a narcissistic borderline personality organization, a parent with that organization of personality, that parent does not allow the child to have their authentic feelings, thoughts, and even their behaviors, because it's all about them and their survival. Basically, they use the child to prevent decompensation associated with the divorce or the breakup. The narcissistic style, okay, so for the more borderline style parent, this psychological fusion with the child represents an idealized interpretation of love, in which the attachment figure meets an infantile desire for a perfectly attuned and empathic regulatory other. For the narcissistic style parent, this fused psychological state is achieved when the relationship partner provides the perfect narcissistic reflection for the self-grandiosity of the narcissistic personality. This continually fused psychological state is not healthy. In an authentically healthy, loving relationship, the two relationship partners are separate, autonomous individuals who are bonded in a shared state of mutual affection that nevertheless has clearly established psychological boundaries which acknowledge and respect the psychological integrity and psychological separateness of the other person. The perfect and idealized love sought by the borderline style personality and the perfectly reflecting narcissistic object sought by the narcissistic personality represent extreme pathological relationship structures involving unhealthy boundary violations of the psychological integrity of the child and as a separate and autonomous person. So that's it for today. And I hope you continue to love to learn, and very good.